Good morning, everyone. Absolute pleasure to be here. Really looking forward to what I think is going to be a really insightful discussion to kick off this forum for the next few days. We're talking about innovation and innovative solutions, and we're asking if leapfrogging is a reality or a myth. And we've got the perfect panel here to talk about this as well. Let me introduce them. Jeremy Hodara, at the end there, is the co-founder and co-chief executive of Jumia Group in UAE. Then we have Vahid Monadjem here in the centre, who's the chief executive officer of Nomanini in South Africa. And Osakwe, who's the founder and chief executive officer of Agrolay Ventures Nigeria. You may not know what they are, so this is the opportunity for us to set the tone, I think, about entrepreneurship. And who shall I pick on first? Vahid. Let us know who you are. Say about a minute's worth of who you are and what you're going to bring to this discussion.
Okay. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak here. My name is Vahid. I'm CEO of Nomanini. Nomanini is a company focused on bringing electronic payments and banking to your local corner store. So we work with small shops to street traders and enable them to facilitate electronic payments for their community. We do this in Zambia, Mozambique, Ghana, Kenya, Namibia, so a few countries. And I think what I'm keen to talk about is partnership models for delivering innovation into these markets. And also maybe I can share some scars from the journey we've had so far.
Scars are always good. Battle wounds, I think. Jeremy.
Thank you so much for inviting us. My name is Jeremy. I'm the founder and CEO of Jumia. This is an e-commerce group present in more than 20 countries in Africa. And our objective is to build an internet ecosystem that brings solutions to Africans in order to be able to access to products and services that otherwise would be difficult to access in the traditional physical brick and mortar world. And therefore, the question about the leapfrog is very relevant for us.
Ada.
Good morning, everyone. Over the last few years, I became very passionate about the agribusiness space in Africa and the potential for us to do so much. So I decided to found a company that basically focuses on investing in early stage food businesses across the value chain in agriculture. So I really have gone through a career path that has been in private sector and then moved into quasi-public public sector with development finance. And then I worked with the government of Nigeria for 4 years in public sector, and now I'm an entrepreneur. So bringing that perspective in terms of having seen the policy side and obviously having gotten those battle wounds as well as an entrepreneur, it's quite interesting as we discuss issues around leapfrogging and private sector and entrepreneurship on the continent.
Now, I can tell you when we were behind the stage, there were some quite lively discussions between these three. They're not going to agree on everything, although they are going to be obviously very pleasant to each other. One of the issues we're thinking about is entrepreneurial talent. It is beginning to get noticed. And startup companies, new technologies, innovative business models are appearing to tackle Africa's big challenges. So the question is technology and entrepreneurship enough to unleash Africa's economic potential, which is what we're going to be talking about now. Vahid, so let's talk about entrepreneurship and the extent that perhaps they could play a role in driving Africa's future growth. There's a focus, isn't there, on this hype. Does that reflect the reality at the moment?
There definitely is a very strong narrative pushing people towards entrepreneurship. I think there's a lot of Silicon Savannah, Silicon Cape, Silicon Valley stories. I think the reality is that this is a very different context. These are very different markets with very different challenges. And so sometimes there's a big field of creating entrepreneurs, but actually creating the enabling environment for them to thrive.
What's the biggest the difference in terms of the challenges?
I mean, it starts just from market size, right? The U.S. is close to a $20 trillion economy. Versus the whole of Africa being about 3.3 trillion. It's about the size of Germany, spread across 54 countries. So we start with just the economics of the potential growth horizon for companies in these economies, and it's very different. Then if you look at the addressable market, the types of customers we're serving, it's a completely different context. So I think that is one issue where entrepreneurship seems to be the cure-all for everything, but entrepreneurs are unlikely to be building roads, to be the ones who are going to be figuring out the full end of public services that need to be there. I think entrepreneurship is not the cure-all. I kind of see it as the government and public sector is responsible for ensuring the horizon of growth is there, and entrepreneurs are responsible for realizing that potential.
Well, Jeremy, you were the head of Africa's first unicorn, first $1 billion US dollar flotation. What potential are you seeing that perhaps isn't being untapped that Vahid's alluded to?
I mean, the way we look at Africa and each country, because it's a sum of countries, is that the demand is here. There is a lot of demand for a lot of things. And sometimes there is a misconception about Africa that the problem is the demand. The reality is that people even have to travel to Dubai or have to travel to Europe, to London to buy product and to bring back in Africa because the distribution infrastructure is not there. And so what we believe is that technology is actually bringing a solution for the supply. So if you wait to have in Lagos, for example, as many malls, as many shops as in Dubai, it will never happen. And yet people will, will need to buy products and need to buy services. So they will find a way to access to those products and services in a way that is very different from the way it has been built in the rest of the world. And so that's why we believe internet with e-commerce and a lot of other services is a great opportunity for people to fulfill their needs that they have in a way that is more efficient than even what has happened in the rest of the world, where you had to build a bank at every street corner, where you had to build shops and you had to build travel agencies. All of that will not happen. People will have a bank account, people will buy plane tickets, people will buy a TV, and they will not go to the shop. And this is going to happen in Africa because this is a place where it's going to be the most difficult to replicate the density of the infrastructure. And that's why entrepreneurs have this ability to think differently, probably, and to see this opportunity in a way that is different from how it has been built traditionally.
It's interesting, you're coming from a technological perspective. You not so much, Hodara.
Yes, and I sort of agree with Jeremy with regards to technology being that way of pushing things forward, the pivot, or helping you to leapfrog these issues. But there are still fundamental issues and challenges that we face that wouldn't facilitate that technology can't even thrive if you don't have proper electricity or power. So as we think about leapfrogging, for example, leapfrogging with new technologies down the line, and when you talk about leapfrogging, that's skipping many stages, right, in the typical way of things. I feel that it really depends on the type of leapfrogging. So is it leapfrogging new technologies, or is it leapfrogging issues around best practices or ideologies? And I'll use my company as an example. So one of our flagship companies is called Nuli. We basically started one of the first cold-pressed juice companies in Nigeria. We make fresh, local fruits and vegetables. We make it into a juice product that more or less is a better substitute, and it's healthier for you because we're sourcing from local farmers, making it into a branded product and giving it to a more nutritional value for consumers. In other parts of the world, cold-pressed juice is also one of the fastest growing beverage segments. And for them, they were able to increase their shelf life of a 4-day, 5-day juice to about 30 days by implementing technology, high-pressure pasteurization. Come to me in Nigeria. High-pressure pasteurization, the machine is about $1 million. And if I even get that machine, I need power. I need, light to power it, and we don't have that. So I had to say to myself, am I going to leapfrog by immediately going into ensuring I have a juice product that can stay 30 days, but it still maintains its integrity? Or am I just going to leapfrog with the ideology and the concept that today people are looking for fresher alternatives that are better for them and then more conscious about their eating habits? And that's the direction we went. So we launched in the market, focused on leapfrogging, going beyond concentrate juice or the McDonald's of the world or whatever, and suddenly showing people better alternatives, which is in line with what's happening everywhere else. But we're now having to use technology to help us accelerate in those stages. So not skip the stages, but accelerate our progress to ensure we get there. So I think we need to sometimes look at these issues when we use the word leapfrogging in Africa, and Africa is leapfrogging, and it's just the best place to be. That's sort of what I think.
It's interesting to get your experience. Want to remind you as well that we're open to questions here. You can use the app when you can. You've all hopefully logged in and you're able to get them. I've got them on here and put them to the panelists. Also, reminder that the poll is still going that you were told about earlier on. The question, how can Africa's young entrepreneurs overcome obstacles to growth? And we're seeing a favour. I wouldn't mind some reaction here, maybe Vahid or Jeremy Adder. 64%, so 2/3 of the room saying that they can identify new solutions to the big challenges. 1/3 saying they can't do much unless governments adopt forward-thinking policies. Adder, I can see you nodding. Vahid.
I mean, I don't think the questions are actually mutually exclusive. Identifying the opportunities is not the problem. It's seeing them through that's the difficult part. And that takes time and takes effort. And just drawing on kind of experience that we've had, we were doing fantastically in Mozambique. We'd acquired several thousand merchants within a few months, and they were transacting great numbers on our platform. And then the Mozambican economy stumbled, and the currency went from 34 to the dollar to 78 over the course of a few months. I think, sustaining a payments business under those conditions is extraordinarily difficult. So identifying the gap is one thing. I think having an enabling environment to get it to grow and keep growing, that's where enabling policies are important.
Isn't that what every entrepreneur, potential entrepreneur, needs to accept, that there will be setbacks, even though you can't foresee the setbacks? The setbacks because the idea of stability isn't as established in many African countries.
I mean, overall innovation is dangerous, right? You take on all kinds of risk. You take on technology risk, can you actually execute and deliver this new kind of gizmo? You take on market acceptance risk. Will the users actually take to this new gizmo? Then you have all kinds of external risks. I think the size or the order of magnitude of external risks are just significantly larger here, and acknowledging that's the reality is just is necessary for entrepreneurs.
Ada, you were nodding.
No, I just think he's absolutely right, and we just can't avoid it. I'm surprised that number is at 36% for these forward-thinking policies. Having worked on the side of government and won that cap for 4 years, I know the power of policy in driving the economy. And if we say private sector is the engine of growth in the buzzword type speak, if we say entrepreneurs are the future for Africa, if we say young people are the future and we need to create jobs, then we need to create the environment for that and have the right policies to drive that. And I just don't see it happening quick enough. Our leaders, they go around, they talk the good talk, they show the numbers, but we get back and we have issues. I had a store, brick and mortar, not using, I believe in click and mortar, so it can work together. So we have a store, and, I woke up one day and my staff said to me that folks are here to demolish the store, that apparently the landlord didn't have some permits or someone had an issue with the landlord, whatever, someone high up. And I watched bulldozers go right into a store that was open for 5 weeks, brand new, poured investment into it. And so you can imagine, I had in that store about 11 young people between the ages of 20, 25 years old working. They had jobs at a time when 2 weeks before the government had just announced that there was a recession. So you then wonder, what's the disconnect? In one breath you say something and then you're not following through to make sure the right agencies are doing whatever to make sure that entrepreneurs like myself who are creating jobs, who are in an industry and a sector that you say is good for you, or good for your economy, you're not pushing it forward. So I think that we just need to do a better job in the policy space. Our governments do.
Well, Jeremy, I'd be interested to see, you've expanded, 9 companies in more than 30 countries in Africa. So you've obviously come across different governments, different paces of change and expectations of change. Have you dealt with the disappointment or perhaps, on the flip side, a happy surprise?
I mean, there are two types of obstacles for us. I mean, even in the question, you know, obstacles for growth. I think some of the obstacles are actually, it's a cliche, but it's true, are opportunities. You know, people say, you know, consumers don't have a credit card, they cannot pay online, people don't have an address, this and that. It's actually an opportunity. So it's not an obstacle, it's something that as an entrepreneur you take into account and you find a solution that makes you different and competitive on the market. So this we like. What is a challenge, to your point, is when, you know, in Nigeria last year we had 2 devaluations, in Egypt we had 1 devaluation, etc. And that puts the entire economy, not only the entrepreneurs, but the entire economy at risk. And it's not only a problem for entrepreneurs, it's a problem for every business. Yeah. And what we need to do is to accept that it is part of the journey. It's part of the journey. I mean, we will have more problems in more countries. We are in Kenya, something is happening today. We are in other countries where something will happen tomorrow. So what we believe is we need to build a business that is resilient enough to go through those things. Because they are not a surprise. They will happen. We don't know when, we don't know where. But those things will always happen at some point in a country. And so we try to build a business that can, you know, accelerate when things are good and that can go through the bad time, because there are bad times by definition in our countries. And we are too small and we don't know how to influence it. So it's not something that we take at heart to, you know, work on policies, etc. We don't know how to change that. What we know is that it's going to happen and we should not be taken by surprise.
Is that more so in Africa than it would be elsewhere?
I mean, we are based in Africa, so I don't know elsewhere. But what we believe is it depends how you look at the growth potential. If you zoom out, the growth potential of Africa is very big, it's very fast, it's growing. The challenge is when you zoom in, it's going up and down. So, you know, the growth is very big from outside, but when you are inside, you can have 1 year of, a complete economic collapse, and that's going to continue. It's going to continue. So I don't know how it is outside, but for sure in Africa, the growth is big, but it's more chaotic. And so the way we try to build a business is to be resilient to that and say, you know, we need to go through the bad times so that we can accelerate in a good time. At least in Europe, you don't have those kind of problems. In Europe, when it's growing, it's a bit like this, and then when it's not growing, it's a little bit like that. And you know, that's where you play. Here in Africa, we have to go through those, and country by country, it changes, and it's not very easy to forecast, so we would go through it.
Vahid, what about the value of partners for entrepreneurs and how those partnerships need to be developed in order just to survive?
Yeah, it's something that we've grown through partnerships in every country. The idea that we're going to land in Mozambique or in Cote d'Ivoire and do something on our own is just an alien thought to us. And so one of our recipes for addressing merchants, these informal retailers at scale, is to work with existing distributors of either mobile services or fast-moving consumer goods. And those partners have proven to be the difference between being able to acquire thousands of merchants or being able to acquire a couple dozen. I think more recently, one of the shifts that we've made is to start partnering with banks. This notion that there's disruption I think is less useful than disruptive partnerships. We're not trying to displace banks. We're actually trying to bring them closer to their customer. And that's already proving to enable us to aggregate at an even higher level and address more merchants. I think we're really excited about the potential for innovation through corporate partnerships. What kind of activities or partnerships can you form with the large incumbents, with the mobile operators, with the banks, with the manufacturers, with the distributors? That, I think, is almost more important for us and more influenceable for us than trying to influence policy or regulation.
Hodara, I'd be interested just in talking about funding and financing. You were part of the private equity fund, which focused on investing in SME agribusinesses. Yeah. How did you approach that in terms of how accessible funding needs to be?
It was a very interesting time. So as a government, we decided that we needed to demonstrate to private sector investors that food was a viable sector to be in. Agribusiness was a viable sector to be in because many people so far had stuck to power and oil in our country. So I think for us, it was very much showcasing the investment case, letting people know that a country like Nigeria with 170 million people we were top producers in Africa of pineapples, 8th in the world, yet we were still importing the concentrate that goes into our juices that those 170 million consumers, they consume. So imagine if we just flipped that and made sure it was locally sourced. The sort of opportunity that Jeremy mentioned was just would open up. Nigeria was spending $1 billion equivalent yearly importing tomato paste, yet we're the largest producer of tomatoes in Western Central Africa. And you say to yourself, we have farmers who are doing this, why are we bringing it in? Or we're importing rice from Thailand or wheat from the US. And you just say, so being able to put that out to investors and show the numbers and the data was powerful. And for us to be able to raise that financing and showcase that things were being done. But then it's one thing to say that to investors, but it's another thing for them to see that the government is focused on creating the policies to make sure it's sustainable. That if they bring their FDI in today, am I fine to stay on for the next 10 years to get the return on my investment? So we did that. We worked with the German government, KfW, to also leverage other funding sources. And today they've done about 4 investments. In total, they raised about nearly $70 million, and it's going. And even now, that more or less catalyzed and opened up the space, and more people are increasingly looking at the agribusiness sector and the food sector as a very interesting and viable opportunity.
I'm going to flip that almost on its head, Jeremy, when I talk to you about whether or not Africa is moving beyond commodities, so to speak, and actually now moving to a more consumer economy, building a consumer economy.
Can you repeat the question?
Is Africa moving beyond commodities now and moving towards a more consumer economy?
I mean, from our humble, angle and business, definitely. I mean, our business is to sell consumer good products. So we are building e-commerce websites and we sell consumer good products. What we observe, and we are not economists, so we don't know what's the middle class definition, we don't know what's the size of the middle class, all those questions. What we know is that if we are going to the airport here, we will see so many people who are traveling back to Africa, luggage full of products, because they cannot find the products in Africa. And so there are people who want to purchase products, who want to buy their first TV, who want to buy their first mobile phone, who want to buy their first fridge, and they cannot find it at a good price, genuine products, with an easy access in their home country. And that's why we think that there is value. Now, that doesn't mean that, as you were saying, we don't need to build infrastructure, of course. But there is a demand at the moment that is being met in a way that is not very efficient because people have to find parallel, import or travel abroad to fulfill their needs.
How is, Vahid, maybe you touched on this with the banking, new technologies, new business models, how are they impacting established sectors at the moment?
Yeah, I think, so I'm an engineer and I have a bias towards technology, but I do think the business models are the more innovative bit. If we look at the mobile phone revolution in the last decade in Africa, partly it was a new technology, but I think the more radical thing was the fact that they developed a payments model that enabled consumers $1 at a time via these little prepaid scratch cards to pay for their mobile service, and unlocked an enormous market that then proceeded to put $1 billion of capex in the ground in telecommunications. I think that was the radical shift, was the business model. Similarly, we spoke about electricity being, lack of provision of electricity being a real problem. M-Kopa in Kenya now is using that innovative business model to bring out solar. Yeah, I'm not sure necessarily the fundamental new technologies are the interesting thing about what's emerging in Africa. I think it's the new business models.
It'd be interesting for us to reflect on issues around, you have the new technologies, you have the emerging business models, but there's one thing for us to bring it in and adopt it. So there's an issue of adoption, and then there's the issue of scale that we also talk about with regards to ensuring that this is sustainable or there's a lasting impact. And I believe research was done recently by the World Bank or cited by the World Bank that in developed countries, for example, it was a small sample set, but they had about 28 new technologies they looked at. And at adoption, it was about 5%. But those companies went on to get over 50%, 26 of them, of the 28, went on to get over 50% penetration. So they really scaled up. And they looked at developing countries, including Africa, and they looked at about 67 companies or new technologies that initially started off at the same 5% adoption, so great. So we're going to scale, we're going to do this, there's a market. Only 6 of the 67 reached 50% penetration and scale. So I do think that we brought up some of the issues, the challenges to leapfrogging or scaling or ensuring these new technologies are not just adopted, but we need to do so much more too, to go forward.
I know, Jeremy, there was the discussion backstage as well about it's all very well having mobile technology, but if people don't have access to mobile phones, don't have mobile phones, or smartphones, exactly, Ada.
Things are changing very fast. I mean, when we started the business 5 years ago, everybody in our office had a BlackBerry. Yes. And every taxi driver had a feature phone. If you go now in most of the countries in Africa, everybody in the office has a Chinese Android phone, and the taxi driver have a cheap smartphone. I mean, you have brands now that make amazing smartphone for $50. 5 years ago, it costed $200. So we look at two things. One, we believe that this technology is much more affordable today, and you can really see it in the streets. The second thing also is to, in our opinion, not be too much focused on the percentages, because they are low. I mean, whatever is the percentage of internet penetration in Nigeria, is it 40, 50, 60%? We don't know. But the population is 200 million people. So it still makes a lot of people, whatever is the real number, who have access to the internet in a way that is very different from only 5 years ago. So we look at the absolute number of people who can now access to the internet, and this is growing extremely fast. The percentage is, of course, lower than in other regions, of course.
I think just building on that, like, the inflection point, especially with smartphones, is incredible. Côte d'Ivoire, a country of 25 million people, the second mobile network in the country sold 2 million smartphones last year. So imagine almost 10% increase off of the second mobile network in terms of smartphone penetration. So definitely there's an accelerating trend towards digital communications. And
Do you think that then digital is the area that entrepreneurs should be focusing on in Africa?
I think digital-enabled businesses, yes, but you can't eat digital. Digital can maybe support a value chain or support logistics, but it's not going to carry a box or grow corn. I
agree, and I just don't think people should be carried away with tech and digital. And I get really passionate about this because I say to myself, I'm currently fundraising, and we've all fundraised. Entrepreneurs, it's kind of what we do. And I say to people that if I just had Agrolay Tech as the name of my company, my valuation, everybody would be, would get all excited, and there would be, but it's just Agrolay. Hey, I do food, we do agriculture, and people are like, really? But yet, you look at my numbers compared to maybe some new tech startups, I'm already profitable, they're still kind of getting there. So you sort of start dissecting this and say, when do we kind of flip and get people to see the real economy? And I agree with you, tech-enabled is a way to look at it, but don't discount the likes of Agrolay or, oh, she does juice, you know? But everybody eats. It's the largest industry in the world. We all get up today and we eat. So if you see it that way, it's a huge opportunity. So let's not get carried away with the sexy or what people think is sexy tech, or he has a tech business. You know,
Jeremy, you're not going to defend the sexiness of tech?
Not at all. Fully agree. Fully agree.
Dubai, we are obviously here. What role could Dubai play when it comes to supporting Africa's transformation? There is a reason we are talking about this here today. Vahid.
I always go first. I'm not sure.
Well, you can go last next time.
Well, I think, this exact forum is a big part of shining a light on the opportunity in Africa, sharing the challenges. Hopefully, a big part of the conference and the discussions will be separating hype from reality I think there are some real challenges, and quite often we're selling the opportunity so hard we breeze over the challenges. And I think, especially in this kind of forum with this kind of esteemed guests, it would be really important to discuss the challenges head on. I think beyond that, the thin market capitalization, across Africa, it is quite difficult to raise funding unless you kind of hit those keywords. These days, if you can include Bitcoin or AI in your prospectus, then suddenly it's interesting. But there's a real distance between people making the investment decisions quite often and the businesses on the ground. And I think this is maybe where Dubai could play a role in becoming closer and more familiar with these markets and really understanding the context and the consumers in these markets.
Jeremy?
I would say two things. I think the first one is not for us, but more for the beginning of the session about the policies and the regulation. I think the long-term vision here is a role model for, not only for Africa, for any other country in the world. I was, before the session we were discussing, I was reading the newspaper last week, and I found this, the release of the partners for 2071 Dubai vision. I mean, the leadership of this country is already thinking about 2071. That's very impressive. I mean, it's not only impressive for Africa, it's impressive for any country in the world to be able to start thinking about what will be the challenges in 2071 and to start to plan ahead of it. So I think that's one role model. The second reason why Dubai is probably a great help is the network effect. We work with a lot of companies that are Pan-African. We are also Pan-African, and at some point, the best place for us to be seated is in Dubai, because the travel to Africa is very simple. Most of the decision makers that have business across Africa are based out of Dubai. The people who live in Dubai are very hungry and very eager to travel to Africa. I mean, I'm French. If you would ask someone in France to travel to Lagos, that would be a big deal. If you live in Dubai and you ask one of your colleagues to travel to Lagos, it's very normal because people are used to traveling to this region of the world. So I think there is a sense of proximity to the region, to your point, that is very strong here and makes the business relation with Africa very natural.
Is that something you've experienced, Ada, especially in fundraising or raising awareness, the relationship you've had with Dubai, perhaps?
Yes, I was going to say my 2 points for Dubai. One was to pivot off his first point regarding vision, and the vision they've demonstrated, but I think it's the execution part of it. It's not just to put great plans on paper, but they just do it. You look back, all my years coming here, you just see things moving, you see progress. And being able to share that with our leaders and our policymakers and just help, even if it's just to guide and say, this is how we did it, this is who we got on board. Just execute, let's see something. And I think the second thing maybe is on the point you're raising with regards to funding. I think the power of capital is huge, and being able to be a financing partner, bringing money onto the continent, which I believe is already happening in a big way, but then having conversations like this and us honing into what aspects or what areas makes most sense for investors here to support on the continent will be quite interesting. But capital is key. It's what makes economies move.
The problem with capital, regardless of where it comes from going into Africa, is we've spoken about the challenges of electricity, for example, the infrastructure problems. There's also still the spectre of corruption and the fluid,
the C word.
The C word, yes. And, I'd appreciate all of your thoughts on this and how you convince, especially as entrepreneurs, how you convince investors that their money, their investment is going to be properly used.
In the end, as an investor as well, you hear the phrase, you back the rider, not the horse, and there just has to be a level of trust coming in. People have to do their due diligence properly, see a track record of someone who's executed, and delivered.
But as a new entrepreneur, that's difficult, isn't it?
It is difficult. It is difficult, but there are other things to look at. Their track record of when they were in the corporate world, or just who their friends are, what sorts of businesses. There are many companies today who do those background checks and stuff. So there's only so much you can do. Yes, history can tell, but you don't know once that money is in the bag, what they're going to do with it and how it's going to influence them. You just have to take a bet, right?
Vahid?
I'm trying to think, we haven't had experiences of really getting squeezed by any kind of corrupt officials, where there have been blockages in a process. There's pretty much always a way around that doesn't involve paying someone off. I think maybe where there are mining licenses or things that are so unique that you have a rent-seeking approach to this unique asset, you'll have unique gatekeepers. There's no way around. But I think in our markets, there's always, if there's one official that is refusing to do this, we can appeal to someone else. And we've never actually had to deal with corruption.
Which is refreshing to hear, but I don't know, Jeremy, tell us your experiences.
No, I think it's,
it's still what investors are seeing or considering. The C word is definitely something that is applied to countries in Africa.
Investor who wants to invest in Africa know Africa. You are not going to convince someone who has never been in Africa, who doesn't know Africa, to start invest in a new business in Africa. You don't build your knowledge of Africa overnight over an investment decision. It's not happening like that. And I think the investors I've had the chance to meet, they know Africa very well. They know what's happening very well. And the reality, as you say, is much less dark than what people have as misconception. Of course, when you build a company, you don't try to apply for a mining license. Those are the kind of business I have no idea if it's corrupted or not. But there are for sure some industries where maybe the entry ticket exists. I don't know, but possible. Now, what can happen on a day-to-day basis is some small pain. But as you said, it's nothing. It's never an obstacle. It's never really a problem. It's just a matter of being clear if you want to deal with those little pain points in a normal, ethical way, and find a good solution that is okay, or if you are willing to go into it, and you don't have to. You really don't have to. And most of countries like that.
I'll just remind you, we've got about 10 minutes left in this session, so if you do have any questions, you can get them through the app. What I would ask is, just for considering there are potential investors here and potential entrepreneurs listening, watching as well, how easy is it, or how possible is it to be an entrepreneur in Africa? Obviously, you've all done it, but what should you think about as a potential entrepreneur in Africa? And Vahid, I am going to start with you. In terms of what you should be telling potential investors, in terms of how you should be approaching business and succeeding, what makes it different?
I haven't actually had the counterfactual experience of being an entrepreneur outside of Africa, so I'm not sure what the difference really is. I suppose just the two qualities that I think any entrepreneur has or needs to have is curiosity and persistence. Being able to kind of empathize with consumers who might live a very different life from yours, I think is especially acute in Africa, where the social economic stratification and differences in society is immense. And that persistence, being able to see through those ups and downs is even more important in these markets. And maybe the third one, we have a very experienced angel investor that came on a few years ago, and it was really interesting. The more experienced the angel, the less concerned she seemed to be about the 40 pages of the subscription agreement, rather than just signing it. And it was really, there's a lot more to backing the horse than the rider. I think the reality is to enforce contracts in a lot of these countries is actually more expensive than kind of the value that's being put into it. there's a lot to do with interpersonal trust that actually becomes much more important in these markets.
Ada?
No, he's right. You know, there's a lot to do with trust and building that. But as we think about using that word sexy again with tech and all, but issues around entrepreneurship, I think we've glamorized it so much on the continent, at least in the last decade. And I try to tell young people not to get carried away, that not everyone can be an entrepreneur. You need that resilience and the persistence. And specifically, it's already difficult enough to be an entrepreneur in the US or wherever else in more developed markets. Talk less of operating in a more difficult environment like Africa, like my country, Nigeria. So I think we need to push our young people who are increasingly sitting behind computers in some accelerator somewhere saying they're building an app and it's going to be the next big Mark Zuckerberg thing, to get the experience of corporate world, to get the discipline and go out to learn new things as well. And I think, and that's in a very big way, I really want to try and push that and send that message. So when people meet new people, it's all about trust and ensuring that they can deliver.
So it's not necessarily a young person's or a teenager's, young 20s person's game, entrepreneurship, in your view?
No.
Because you're saying, you know, you go out, get the corporate experience.
Yes, and I think even the stats in maybe more developed world show that many successful entrepreneurs actually started at 40, 45, 50, right? Yeah, so I think we need to get that, remove that halo effect from our youth. You know, there's over 50% unemployment amongst our youths in many countries in Africa, and we need to create those jobs. So make sure the entrepreneurs who are there today succeed so that they can become the big unicorns and become the big companies that employ the young people coming out of school, rather than everyone scrambling around, like I said, behind a computer trying to build an app.
Do you agree, Jeremy?
I agree. I mean, when I look at the people I know in Europe who are entrepreneurs, it's very, very different character and personality from Africa. I mean, not to diminish their merit, but you know, when you are an entrepreneur in Europe, it's relatively relaxed and easy. You know, you have great offices and you have so many people to help you everywhere, and worst case you fail, you know, you go back to your previous job. I mean, it's nice. And actually, as you say, it's very sexy and quite cool to be an entrepreneur in Europe. In Africa, I think to your point, you need a stronger character. You know, you don't have a plan B, you don't have everybody to help you. It's probably tougher. So I think the people I see in Africa who are entrepreneurs, they have a much stronger personality and much stronger character than the one at least I know in Europe. But eventually the opportunity is also bigger. I think when you try to be an entrepreneur in Europe, you are very quickly in a small niche, because things have been done before. Nobody is waiting for you. And it's hard to come up with a new idea. When you are in Africa, you can still probably, if you're an entrepreneur, have a chance to do something that can be relatively successful and big and at scale, while the opportunities are, of course, a bit more scarce, in my opinion, now in Europe.
What did your European colleagues or people you've interacted with since, what did they think of you venturing in Africa?
I mean, at least again, the people I know, I think they understand why this is a great opportunity. You know, consciously they understand, but I think what it takes to do it is something they are not willing to do, which is the point about you know, being willing to build everything yourself. You know, you cannot call and someone is going to do your customer service on your behalf, and you cannot call someone who is going to build a website on your behalf and come someone else who is going to do the marketing on your behalf. You have to build things yourself. And I know many people who rationally understand the opportunity is great, but are not willing to do what it takes to build by themselves. And I think that's a big difference from the kind of entrepreneurs I see, at least in Europe and in Africa.
Did you want to say something, Vahid?
Yeah, just going back to the myth of the prototypical young entrepreneur. I know this section is about young entrepreneurs, but you know, even in developed markets, the median age of successful entrepreneurs starting out is about 45. The Mark Zuckerbergs and teenagers in hoodies narrative is the edge case, not the norm. And I think we quite often push the anecdotal edge case as what should be the norm, and it's a lot riskier. It's a risky proposition.
It's interesting you say it, because obviously the question that we've had polling, and please do use your apps to contribute, has evened out a bit more from when we first began this session. How can Africa's young entrepreneurs overcome obstacles to growth? And it's young entrepreneurs. But regardless of the age, I think what's clear is unless governments adopt these forward-thinking policies and allow the access and allow businesses that are established, as you made the point, to keep employing, then the young entrepreneurs, are they going to be disillusioned, do you think, Ada? I mean, yes. is there that problem if now there are so many obstacles?
They could be, but I would say I don't want to blame the government alone, because many of us are operating right now in spite of this lack of favorable policies and stuff. I do want us to think through how private sector, the investors, folks here in Dubai, can truly play their part to help facilitate and catalyze growth even faster for entrepreneurs on the ground. And I think some of the things that are coming out from this panel, when Jeremy was saying we have to build ourselves, as long as investors know and have the view that if I do come into Africa, I'm going to have to build this. I'm going to have to take in the agriculture, in my space, it's the supply chain, it's the cold chain, it's owning my logistics, it's ensuring that I have buyers, whatever, that I typically don't have to deal with elsewhere. As long as they have that mindset and are ready for that game, that long play, there's so much to gain. There is. So I think investors, if I'm supposed to leave a word, don't have the copy-paste approach that this is how we did it in the US, so it's going to be the same here. But just have the open mind that it's going to be patient capital. It has to be more flexible as well to deal with those ups and downs. But I believe the long game is going to be quite rewarding.
Jeremy, in terms of that's the message to entrepreneurs and what they should be thinking. What about governments, heads of state? What should they be doing to be selling the idea that entrepreneurism works in their countries?
I mean, we are present in several countries in Africa. There are countries where it's very easy, and the governments are making the life of companies such as ours very simple, and it doesn't have to be an incubator. I think at least us, what we expect is not incubators everywhere. I think what we need are simple rules, predictable rules, things that do not change overnight, government who understand what we are doing, who we can speak to, and that's already more than enough. Of course, we need internet access and everything. That's given. But what we expect is not a series of incubators at everywhere in the city. I don't think that's what people need the most. They need capital, they need support, they need help, but they need to have predictability so they know that what they build today is not going to be overturned tomorrow by some unpredictable change. And there are several countries in Africa where it's exactly the case. And it's very, very clear difference with other countries where we don't know what's going to happen next month. And at least for us, that makes a big difference.
Vahid, how much does that influence your presence in certain countries in Africa in terms of stability or continuity of message?
Yeah, I mean, so predictability in this unpredictable world, anything that increases predictability is important. I do think the disconnect between the front end of government and the intentions of government would be really interesting to work out. We have brought in several $1 million of foreign direct investment. We employ dozens of people in South Africa, and it took me 1.5 years to renew my work permit. So the official there was putting a lot at risk, even though the stated intentions of the government and the policies are supportive of these things. So I think internally there's an alignment issue with the front face of government, and maybe there needs to be some kind of entrepreneurs hotline or SWAT team that governments can put in place to unblock some of these.
Well, it's an idea that's definitely been mooted in other countries. Why not? Why not in many in Africa?
But if I may also, I think as an entrepreneurs, we should not be so focused always on government, policies, etc. Just to voice another opinion. I think, you know, I'm from France. I think, you know, creating a company in France is much more cumbersome than in most African countries. And yet, you know, people build companies. So I think at some point we also need just to do our job of building companies and not always look for a reason not to do it because of government. I think, you know, it's not the right focus as an entrepreneur to spend all your energy thinking that you can change policies or whatever. They are very good already. They are probably better than in a lot of countries you would not expect in other places. And as an entrepreneur, your focus is not to meet a minister or to change policy. Your focus is to build a business, to find customers, to work with your suppliers, and the government comes to your attention from time to time, but it's not the #1 topic on your agenda, I believe.
Don't forget the sole purpose, creating your own business. It's been a very interesting discussion. Thank you very much. Adat, Vahid and Jeremy, thank you very much for your time. Thank you.